Originally, I was going to wait for Chapter 7 EX to come out before I make this review, but Chapter 7 EX is still a long ways away, and in light of recent news, I thought I'd make this review now and make a separate video for 7EX. This arc did a lot of things better than the previous arc, but before we get to that, there are two things that you might have noticed immediately that I need to address. One, the whole chapter comes out at once now, which is very nice. Since chapter 26, Hoyoverse has been releasing the chapters in 3 chunks, forcing us to wait 3 weeks until the chapter's fully done. I know some people had an issue with that. Personally, I didn't really mind, but that doesn't matter now because it's gone and you can do the whole chapter in one sitting if you want. Yes, I did say one sitting. That's the second thing I wanted to talk about. The chapters are not incredibly long anymore. What has also been happening since chapter 26 is the chapters have been getting longer and longer, and it eventually culminated into part 1.5 in the previous arc, where all chapters were about 6 to 7 hours long. I think I speak for everyone when I say they don't need to be that long, and luckily, this arc's chapters are all 3+ hours. Chapter 7 is the longest, and even that's below 4 hours, which is a lot more digestible for players, so these are great changes to just make the story easier for people to get into. As great as these changes are, none of that really matters if the story is trash. So is it? Just to clarify some things, this is not the start of the arc. That's chapter 5. This is more of a in-between chapter, bridging the 2 arcs together. This chapter was a fever dream, and I'm not exactly sure it was a good one. For half of the chapter, I did not understand what was happening, and for the other half, I was bored. I'm still not sure I completely understand what happened, but the gist of it is that we go through several different realities of the quantum computer. We go from one disjointed scene to the next until eventually we land in a slice of life scenario where the shadows don't exist. This whole chapter is us talking to the 7 shoes, having a grand old time, and that's it. It's confusing, and in the beginning of chapter 5, Vita states that everything in this chapter is junk data and that it doesn't matter. She was just using this to seek out Layla, and I'll talk about her in a second. That reveal in chapter 5 pretty much rendered this entire chapter useless. It's not that exciting to go through either, which makes this chapter a dud in my opinion. It's not all bad though. As I mentioned, Layla is introduced in this chapter in the best animation of part 2 so far with sick music, and there are hints of Layla earlier in the chapter that's pretty interesting as well. We did get some very interesting tidbits of information that I really liked, but those are the only things that matter in chapter 4. So overall, this chapter is not that good, but if you stick around, you get a very good payoff with Layla at the end. As I said, chapter 4 was not the start of the arc. This is. Unfortunately, it's a pretty strong start. Baiji's backstory was my favorite part of the chapter, really emotional and heartfelt. I didn't expect that, and it was a welcome surprise. Aeta appeared for the first time in this chapter, and I'll talk about her later, but she's really fun. We learned a little more about Litost and Linkju's past in general, and it was not the best thing ever, but it wasn't bad. I enjoyed my time with it. We also get a little info on Layla. It's nothing much, but enough to keep me interested. The only thing I didn't like about chapter 5 was the HSR stuff. Sparkle came out of nowhere and kind of halted the story very abruptly, then never showed up again. I don't know if she will ever come back. There's no signs of it, but I have to imagine she will because this is a very weird plot point to never bring up again. I give this chapter a 7 out of 10. This chapter was amazing. I made a community post about this chapter right after I finished it because I was so impressed. Mostly because this chapter gave us what we wanted since the beginning of part 2. Characterization for Helia, Coralie, we even got some backstory on Chenzu, which we didn't even ask for, but that's dope. And it was just a breath of fresh air to finally care about these characters that have just been blank states for all of part 2 before now. We also get major lore drops for Jita, Litost, Dream Seeker, and the reason she's in the quantum computer, along with expanding on relationship dynamics, and a heartbreaking ending that left me pretty emotional. This chapter is so good, easily my favorite chapter of part 2 as a whole. If there are more chapters like this in the future, I feel great about part 2's future. Unfortunately, this arc reminds me of one of these memes, because this arc was really good, and then it just came crashing down. I'm not sure if I overhyped this in my head because of how incredible chapter 6 was, but I just could not get into this one. This whole chapter feels like one giant teaser for future chapters. Every lore drop that we get is mentioned only once and is never expanded upon, giving us more questions than answers. And that would be fine, but 1, isn't this the final chapter? The next chapter being 7EX would make you think that. And 2, I felt like not much happened in this chapter. I felt that chapters 5 and 6 were really good at giving you questions and answering questions we've had whilst also continuing the story in a way that feels natural. In chapter 5, we found out about the Tenshooth War, got our main goal, and fought in the war to get to Ryumu. In chapter 6, we investigated some of the deeper secrets in Ryumu and found out that Litost was the ultimate villain. In chapter 7, it felt like the only progress we made was going into the High Tower. Every investigation attempt in chapter 7 only gave us more questions, and then it abruptly ended due to something going awry. In my opinion, there's too many questions, too little answers, and the story doesn't go anywhere. It felt like a second to last chapter rather than the last chapter. Combine all that with no cinematics and an underwhelming boss fight, and I just can't say I loved this chapter, and it was a little lackluster for me. To clarify, I did like the mysteries and questions presented. They were pretty intriguing, and I'm excited for 7EX, especially since it looks like we're finally going to get information on Layla. I just wish this chapter expanded the story a little more. I give this chapter a 6 out of 10. Wish it was better, but you can't win them all. As I said, chapter 6 gave us a lot of character development, and thus the characters are in a wildly different state than they were at the end of 3EX. So let's talk about them. Helia went from one of the least interesting characters to the most interesting. In the last review video, I said that it was mentioned in a random side quest that she had an inferiority complex. They took that and ran with it this arc. Her whole thing is that she's a bit of a perfectionist because she views her role model as perfect, wants to be like her, and she wants to save all her friends and get the happiest ending possible. But she can never do that. She always messes up. Therefore, she feels like she's never good enough. You'd expect it to get better, but that's where this arc pulls your pants down a bit. Her complex actually gets worse thanks to something that happens, and I'm actually really worried for her because this is not healthy. However, it is a good thing that I finally care about a character I previously had no interest in. It's great, actually. actually. She also has quite a bit of mystery to her as well now. She has her own version of Siren that is in her mind and wants her to abandon everything for revenge. We don't really know a lot about her, but I am excited to see who she is as well as their dynamic together in the future. They turned Helia from a nothing character to a multi-layered character, and I can commend that. I really like her now. They did a great job. It's time to talk about the woman I cannot stop talking about, and I can't promise I will stop. As I mentioned, Aeta got a pretty big lore drop in Chapter 6, and thus she has become part of our team now. Vita and Aeta are now in the same room with each other, and it's heavenly. They're always butting heads, and it's so funny to witness. I can tell the story won't get any more boring with these two. Aside from that, I still believe wholeheartedly that she's going to become the next main villain. My entire channel has devolved into videos blaming her for every bad thing that has happened in this arc. We got the revelation that she's not an ordinary Shu like the rest. She is a digital life form like Dreamseeker, and she is an administrator for the Dreamseeker system, which worries me quite a bit. She's still doing suspicious things, and it's clear she knows a lot more than she is letting on. If you couldn't tell, I'm still obsessed with her. I've been obsessed with her story since Chapter 2. This revelation about her character just further confirms that she might be bad news, and I'm still eager to learn more about her in the upcoming arcs. These two didn't go through such massive changes as Helia or Aeta, but these two are still really interesting. We find out that Coralie's greatest fear is death, which becomes more heartbreaking when she has to face it a lot sooner than we all realized. Learning about her gave some emotional weight to her death, and her relationship with Helia is heartwarming. I don't care about her as much as Helia, but she has some sort of presence in the story for me now, so that's a good thing. Litost has had some extra presence in the story recently, and I quite enjoy that, as I always thought he deserved more and he was shot down too early. We don't learn a lot about him other than he's mysterious. Even though Baiji has been friends with him for years, he still knows nothing about Litost. He keeps everything behind closed doors. He wants no one to know what he's about, which is very creepy. Litost was another reason I felt like Chapter 7 was a standstill story-wise. In Chapter 6, we get this big lore drop about him, and in Chapter 7, we learn nothing else. We just get, like I said, more questions. It's a little anticlimactic. Hoyoverse is really teasing me with Litost. I thought it was going to be his time to shine. I was wrong. We better have a chapter all about him next arc, or I'm rioting. He's become a very interesting character. I'm very curious about him now, and am eagerly waiting for my questions to be answered. Besides Baiji's past and Aeta, the story hasn't been focusing on the Seven Shoes at all lately. That's not a complaint. It's obvious this arc is about the main characters, and that's actually an improvement since one of the major gripes of the last arc was we just jumped into the Seven Shoes storyline without knowing anything about the main cast. I just want to say that when we do eventually get back to the Seven Shoes, I have one request. They got rid of the anecdotes in this arc, which I'm a bit sad about because I did enjoy making those videos, but I'm mostly happy because one of my complaints in the last review video was that the main story didn't explain things the anecdotes did, and not a lot of people read them. So getting rid of those and putting everything in the story is an improvement, but there is one anecdote I cannot stop thinking about, and that's Puzzle. I want want Savore's past to be part of the main story. If not the main story, then make a Savore character quest like you guys did with the Lemma. Puzzle is the hidden gem of part 2, and I guarantee everyone will like part 2 better if you put this in. Puzzle hit me like a freight train when I first read it, and I can't stop thinking about it. Anyways, that's all I want to say about that. So far, I've only talked about how they improved, but this arc still does a few things wrong that I want to mention. The main one I've already talked about, so I won't go over it at length again, but Chapter 7 was an anticlimactic way to end the arc. It felt like Chapter 3 was a much better finale. There was no ending cinematic, I don't know why. The next one better be 2 times as good. The boss of Chapter 7 was underwhelming. Sparkle being in Chapter 5 and actually in Chapter 4 as well messes up a bunch of the lore and makes no sense, especially since she never appears again. One of my subscribers mentioned a plot hole to me. Vita's whole arc in part 1.5 was that she had such a terrible time under the rule of Saw that she doesn't want to follow any god or goddess again. She wants to make her own rules and be free. When Sparkle asks her to join the Masked Fools, she says yes, even though the Masked Fools worship and follow a god. I'm not worried about the plot hole itself. I'm more worried about how this was the first chapter where they started connecting HSR and there's already a plot hole. That doesn't bode well for the future of your connected universe, guys. You already screwed up the first step. I hope that if they choose to continue this HSR integration, that they figure something out and it ends up being a great thing, but it's not looking good. Chapter 4 mostly being a yap fest between an alternate version of the 7 shoes that ended up not mattering at all was kinda boring. And finally, the Chapter 5 boss fight was not that fun because it was the same as the Chapter 2 boss fight, but with this pause mechanic that never gets explained before or after the boss fight. I still don't know what this is. I don't know if I missed something, but it didn't make the boss fight fun, as I felt like I was just whacking on Savore until I beat her, rather than dodging and doing all these dynamic moves in other boss battles. So while this arc does a lot of good things, they still made some confusing decisions that took me out of the arc a little bit. Overall, I think this arc is a great improvement from the last one. I'm very interested in a lot of aspects of the story I wasn't before, and I'm very excited for Chapter 7 EX. It's not perfect though. As I said, a lot of weird decisions that I think will take a lot of people off guard, but those weird things are pretty small portions of some pretty good chapters. I definitely think that with enough time, Part 2 can become a good continuation of Part 1, as this was already a great improvement. 8.1 will be 9 weeks long, and it's rumored that's how long updates will be from now on. I don't know if that's because they want to sink more time into every update to make sure the story and other aspects are the best they can be. That's what I'm choosing to believe. While it does suck that we will wait longer for updates, if that means better story quality, I'm willing to wait. That's the end of the video, guys. That's all I want to say. How did you feel about this arc? Did you like it? Do you hate it? Let me know in the comments down below. I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.